Welcome, welcome once again to the Radical Imagination, Real Talk in the Hamptons. I'm your host, Jim Vetros, and I'm so thrilled and blessed to have you as our audience and our wonderful guests here today, which I'm going to introduce in just a second. And the topic is going to be protecting the most vulnerable in the Hamptons. And try to organize this show. I've invited other people who unfortunately couldn't make it today. For example, the police chief of East Hampton wasn't able to make it. Mr. Police Chief Erickson. The town police chief is out of town, Sorella, and David Rattray of the East Hampton Star wasn't able to make it as well. But Minerva Perez will be here doing another show next month with me on this topic. But we are now welcoming two incredibly active and just terrific people in our community. First, let me introduce Daniel O'Hare from Maureen's Haven. He's the executive director for the past 9 years. And he has done an incredible job here on sheltering the homeless and organizing various programs to benefit their position in our community. And we also have Reverend Ben Shambaugh, the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And we're so grateful for you to be here and present your position as one of the religious leaders of our community and how you are working toward protecting the most vulnerable. And let me start out with a verse from scriptures here. And I'd like both of you to try to tackle this issue. I believe this comes from Genesis. Are we our brother's keeper? And do we do harm to people when we are asked by God to do no harm? Physicians take an oath. Do no harm. First, do no harm. How do you envision what's happening in our country, around the world, and specifically in the East Hampton community, relating to that crucial moral issue, if you will, spiritual issue? Are we our brother's keeper? How would you respond to that, given the chaotic situation we're facing today with our governing institutions?
Well, Jim, thank you. I just want to say thank you for welcoming me here. Thank you to those who are watching, and Dan for joining us in this conversation together. Am I my brother's keeper? You know, I turn it around to the big question: am I loving my neighbor? Right? I think those two things are intimately intertwined. I come from the Christian tradition. Jesus said, "Love God and love your neighbor," right? And how do we do that? How do we take care of those right around us? So I went to school. I went to seminary in the early '80s in New York City in a school in Chelsea, and that was a time when New York and that neighborhood was kind of rough. And to get to the subway, you walked over bodies. You were aware of stuff. A Holy Apostles soup kitchen at that time was the biggest soup kitchen in New York City, and we were sent there. I was only in my 20s, to go and help those people, and that planted in me a seed for wanting to help, wanting to care, and taking care of my brother or loving my neighbor, right? So since then, I've worked in the suburbs of Chicago. I've worked in Europe. I've worked outside Washington, D.C., and 20 years in Maine, and now I've been here a year and a half. And in all those places, this has really been a primary thing.
What moved you as a young man at that soup kitchen that has stayed with you, obviously, for so many years?
Well, there was the personal, there's the religious side. The personal side was I just was aware that there wasn't much separating me from this guy across the table, that if I didn't have a family, if I didn't have student loans, if I didn't have people supporting me, it wouldn't take very long for me to be on their other side. I could put myself in their shoes.
That's a profound point.
So that we share that common humanity. I did a lot of development work in Africa for a while, and there's a phrase in the Mbutu language. Mbutu is the word, Mbutu means, I am because we are. Mbutu, I am because we are. We exist because we are in community together. So it's not just that I want to help you, but I want to build a relationship with you. That loving you doesn't just mean writing checks.
Charity.
It means building. Charity.
Relationships.
Charity comes from that Latin word caritas. It means to care. If I cherish you, I want to get to know you.
Something
right.
Within the Jewish tradition, of course, love the stranger.
Yeah.
Love the other because you are a stranger in a strange land. So we have that from all kinds of different
traditions. Because when you're
traditions.
loving the other, you might be entertaining an angel. You might be interacting with God, right? So
And
how about that?
Dan, how about that? Segue into Haven.
Okay.
You're the angel. No, but seriously, how did you get started in this tremendously
Sure.
complicated but vital work?
Sure. Well, again, thank you, Jim, for having me and the
It's my
opportunity
honor.
to, educate the community a little bit more about Maureen's Haven and certainly the population that we serve. I think it's very important. And certainly thank you to Ben and everybody at St. Luke's who've been longtime supporters of Maureen's Haven. So I'm truly personally grateful for that ongoing support. My story is a little varied. I spent some time in nonprofit after college, and then I did go into corporate world for some time. And around 2010 or 11, I said to myself, really, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I decided I wanted to go back for my master's degree. And at the time, I was working in higher education, and I said, well, I'm going to get my master's degree in human services leadership, because I saw a future of me going back to serving the community. So I completed my degree, and 2 or 3 years later, kind of serendipitously, I'm looking through, Indeed or one of the job websites, and I saw executive director for a small nonprofit in Riverhead, Maureen's Haven Homeless Outreach, and something struck me. I said, that could be the one. So I wasn't actively looking for a career change, but I was preparing for my future. And when I saw that,
You were raised in this area?
I grew up in Mastic Beach, but I spent the majority of my time here out on the East End. In fact, I met my wife Jennifer at Southampton College back in the 90s.
Okay.
So I have very deep roots into this community here.
Yeah.
And one of the things, back to the topic that you were just talking about, and my brother's keeper and love thy neighbor, but the key point that I got out of what you were saying was relationships. Because yes, there is a certain responsibility to serve in your community. I truly feel that way. And there certainly is a responsibility to be loving and caring of other people. But I know from one of the things that really has impacted me the most with my work at Maureen's Haven has been the trusting and very deep relationships I've had, not only with community members and clergy and volunteers, but the people we serve. Because they are by far the most real, honest, at times, sometimes heartbreaking people you would want to meet. And when they come to Maureen's Haven, we don't have that opportunity to say, am I my brother's keeper? Am I taking care of my community? We are very much a boots on the ground agency. So when you show up at my building, you truly are in a critical situation.
What are some of the reasons that have brought these people to your...
Sure. So, of course, there's the same similar reasons you see nationally, whether it's mental health issues or substance abuse issues. I think that's a fairly common theme. One of the things we see a lot of, certainly lately, is lack of housing. Lack of affordable housing, for one, especially here on the East End, and lack of supportive housing. I don't really believe that the answer is get a hotel and fit 50 people in there without having complete wraparound services to truly support them, to, help them get additional treatment, to integrate better back into the community. So I think it's really important that we look at it from a holistic standpoint, that it's not really one answer suits everybody. One of the things I've seen considerably, especially since the pandemic here on the East End, is people that have been rooted in this community sometimes for generations. And when the pandemic hit, so many people moved out of here. The cost of housing went up. You can't find a rental place anytime now. There's no such thing as winter rentals anymore like there used to be in the Hamptons. And a lot of people found themselves, well, I lived in East Hampton my entire life. A family member sold the house, but I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
My roots are here,
Right.
my support systems are here, I'm gonna live in my car here. And I've seen that increase significantly across the entire East End.
So these are forces beyond the individual, in a sense, structural forces. Of course, we all bear certain responsibility, obviously, for our lives, we make choices. But as a sociologist, there are these structural forces that make such a great difference in individual lives. Therefore, we could easily, any three of us here, any one of us, could have found our way to your facility
Without a doubt.
because of some sort of disability or some sort of misfortune, losing a job. And there's gonna be a lot more people gonna lose that job and losing their homes. So you guys have a big job here. How are you going to, what do you foresee happening, and are you preparing? I don't know how you can, given the chaotic nature of what's going on in Washington, but you must be thinking, wow, this could really hit our community in catastrophic ways.
So I have a side job as a volunteer chaplain for the Coast Guard. And part of my military chaplain training is in something called spiritual resiliency, right? How do you keep going when the going's rough? To use a metaphor, so say I've got some 25-year-old people who go out on a rescue mission off of Montauk, and it's really difficult, and how do I give them tools not only to go out that day, but then to go out the next day and the next day? And when it doesn't work, what happens? And spiritual resilience is about knowing who you are and what your values are, and lining them up. Not to use a religious term, but just to follow your North Star, right? To be and so helping Maureen's Haven, building relationships with these people. If one of my core values is that connection with others, to do that. So really, I think part of that preparation for that resilience is helping people go a little deeper.
Yeah.
That it really is a spiritual question for our community, for our country. Who are we inside? What are our values? And then how do we live that? And do we have the courage to stand up and say something when what we see is not in line with those values, right? That's the tough part. It's easy to write a check. It's harder to stand up and say, wait, let's do something.
Does your congregation, do you speak this way to your congregation? What is is there a mixed reaction, I would imagine?
Yeah, I get some reactions
I'm sure,
when I talk like that.
Yeah.
But that's why I go back to our spiritual values rather than say they're not democratic values or Republican values or liberal or progressive or conservative, whatever. They're who are we and how do we live this out? St. Francis had a phrase. St. Francis said, preach the gospel, and if you have to, use words. In other words, show people what you believe by the way you live. Right? And so the question is, then, what do I really believe? And then how do I live that out, right? And that, I think we're being confronted with today is, who are we? Who are we as a community, as a culture, as a country? And then how do we live that out?
And I'd like to add, going back to, what you just said about spiritual resilience. I remember when the pandemic first hit and the world had shut down. And for a month or two, we were really uncertain what we were going to do. Because thankfully it was March into April, so our winter shelter program had ended. So we were fortunate that we didn't have 30, 40, 50 people in our shelter system at that point. But we really had to take a look back and say, how are we going to move forward? And one of the things I remember speaking with my former board chair, Russell Blue, who had passed away, unfortunately, about a year ago, and we miss him dearly. One of the things he said to me is, who else is going to do it? We have to do it. And just those simple couple of words sort of
Resiliency.
resonated with me. And that's the sort of thing that kind of kept me and my staff and a lot of the volunteers moving forward through really challenging times. And also when we go back to, again, the quote when, I forget exactly how I said it, but don't, if you have to preach the scripture, actions first and then words. I gotta get that saying again before we leave. That's a great saying. And that was one of the things that, me and my staff at that time, especially during those first 2 or 3 years of the pandemic, we're in it with you. You're in the day center with me. You're in the churches at night with us. You're as much vulnerable as we are. And a lot of the people that were utilizing the program at that time, they realized it. Said, these guys are not going virtual. They're walking the walk. They are there with us. And because of that, I always go back to when the vaccination was readily available. I had one point up to 85 to 90% vaccination rate of people utilizing my services. Wow. That came from trust. That came from the people that we serve, seeing me and my staff on the front lines, in the trenches with them. And that level of trust really helped a lot of people, and it continues today, feel like we can come to individuals like Maureen's Haven, and when we really do need help, that we're going to trust them that the advice, the guidance that they're going to give is going to be appropriate and really in their best interest.
Interesting. And of course, I was thinking as you were talking to both of you, Abraham Joshua Heschel put it a little differently. I think saying the same thing. I pray with my feet. Mm-hmm. Get out there and do and walk the walk, as you say, literally walk the walk. But let's get back to realpolitik here. We have people who might say, well, gosh, 85, 90% vaccination, Dan. Well, and I've had him actually in my show in the city, Robert Kennedy. What do you think he might say to you if he was here right now? Well, gosh, do we really need to have that? Are you really studying the effects of this?
Without getting, say,
that
overly deep into that topic right there,
yeah.
I look at that from a very scientific approach. Okay, I very much believe in the numbers. So, is there going to be a percentage where there might be side effects or worse? Of course, it's with everything. We're taking aspirin.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
sure.
And on the flip side of it, it's saving lives. I remember where my location is in Riverhead. It's right. You can see Roanoke Avenue go up, and Roanoke Avenue is the main thoroughfare to Peconic Bay Hospital. And that first summer, I was on the phone with Peconic Bay quite often. I work with their social work department quite a bit. And I remember them saying that Peconic Bay is only accepting COVID cases. Only accepting COVID cases. And I would sit outside my building. The world's locked down. Things are nice and quiet. Everybody's at home watching TV or gourmet cooking or stuff like that. And every 20 minutes, an ambulance would go by.
Yeah.
The Peconic Bay. And that, to me, is how I need to react to what's happening now in the instance. So I do look at, the larger political spectrum as very concerning, and certainly now, with the talks of cutting Medicare and Medicaid, that's going to hurt a lot of people. Cutting SNAP benefits, that's going to hurt so many people that relies on that. They're looking to close HUD and other agencies like that. Whether you agree or disagree, they are doing a lot of work in these communities for these people. Whether it's the best work, whether it could be more efficient, that's out of my pay scale.
Right.
But there is a lot of proof, and I see it every day, that these programs are necessary. So if you're going to be jeopardizing, say, Medicaid and Medicare, especially Medicaid and food stamps, how can somebody who's got no income, homeless, live on $68 a month in food stamps?
So
how does the churches
I
respond to this?
I think that what Dan's talking about, I really have in 40 years of doing this stuff, I really believe in partnerships. Mm-hmm. And it's partnerships with other faith communities. I mean, we are very tight with other faith communities in this part of the East End. interfaith, whatever, that's great. But it's more than that. It's with agencies and it's with the government. And the government is a very important player. I'll just tell you,
Yeah.
before I came here, I was at another St. Luke's, at St. Luke's Cathedral in Portland, Maine. We were where the weekend soup kitchen started in Portland, probably now 50 years ago. And at that time, it was in the church basement, and they served 50 people or something. I got involved in a social service agency that did all that stuff for the city. And we evolved and merged our food program into a social service agency that then got government support. And now that program serves 1 million meals a month.
Yeah.
Right? And we are a small little piece of that, right? Our congregation was a catalyst and one piece of getting a puzzle started that was all about partnerships. Right. And I spent, a big chunk of my time there writing community block development grants to fund the soup kitchen. And that's using government, private, social partnerships. There's everybody working together, because the only way we're going to solve these things is to do that. Right. So for government to get out of the business of helping people, it abdicates responsibility. And it's just not realistic, because I love my church.
Yeah.
We're not big enough to take that all on. The biggest donors in the world, we're generous, we're very generous. The Jewish Center is extremely generous. Yeah. But we need to work together to solve it. And, the social service agency I was part of in Maine, one of the things we did is we trained our volunteers not only in helping people boots on the ground, but in advocacy. To use their voices to lobby for legislation, to work with elected representatives, to partner with the village and the town, because all those things, legislation matters, right? And can really change things. And
it used to.
Well, hopefully, but we forget that. We feel steamrolled. It's
I understand.
We need to stand up. So I just think there's another part of this, and we get shy. We're much more comfortable making a sandwich or feeding a meal or writing a check than, speaking up.
Exactly.
But that's part of it.
No, it's a great point. I just to play devil's advocate. We're gonna have a second segment to this. Well, let me play devil's advocate. Well, you're just creating more dependency. People need to be on their own and fend for themselves and da. These programs are just creating more and more perhaps even isolation or, again, dependency.
So Dan was talking about supportive housing.
Right.
I was very involved in the housing first movement. Yeah. Okay. Providing housing really helps homelessness, but you need those supports. Yes. Because somebody who's dealing with addiction or mental health issues or things like that, you could say get a job. Yeah. It doesn't work unless you've got supports to help them get that job. And when you do that, then all that stuff's going to come, but you got to support them through. So, are you building dependency? I don't know. I mean, I look at the immigrants here are the hardest working, most dedicated people I've ever seen, and they're just trying to make ends meet. These people sleeping in the cars can have a full-time job at McDonald's and still not make ends meet, right?
Many of them do.
Right?
Many of them do, yes. One of the things we always do is we encourage people, especially if you're using our shelter program, find employment. Let's get some money in the bank. For us, first of all of our services are free for the population we serve. So we're not asking for Medicaid billing. We're not asking for insurance. There's certainly no fee to them, which is contrary to when you look at, say, the county system. So if you have an income and you're using Suffolk County social services housing, they're going to take a sizable part of that income to pay for rent. So the chances of getting out of poverty when you got to give 60, 70% of your already meager income back to Suffolk County. So for us, we do encourage people to work because, one, you don't have to necessarily pay for this. And there's an opportunity that come March 31st, when my winter shelter ends, which is 9 days from now, maybe you have a couple $1,000s in the bank. Maybe you could find that apartment.
Is that actually what you're finding now? Now, as you say, March 31st, that's the end of it, in a sense. So now what's going to happen to these people? Are they ready to go out there?
So my program, and just to briefly talk about that, so many people here on the East End know Maureen's Haven Homeless Outreach and our emergency overnight winter shelter program, our church program as it's referred to quite oftenly. That program is truly a life-saving program. So from November through March, and sometimes into April, depending on weather, Maureen's Haven provides emergency overnight shelter to the homeless throughout the entire East End. And we do this in partnership with houses of worship and other organizations. For example, this year, the last 2 years, we've had Bridgehampton Child Care Recreation Center. Let us use the old Head Start building twice a week. So it's predominantly houses of worship. And with that, there are, excuse me, multiple denominations supporting the program, civic associations, youth groups. It's a wonderful,
If I may,
wonderful program.
have they taken in people during the days that you're not sheltering them?
Well, we do it 7 days a week.
7 days a week.
7 days a week. So you can tell by my voice, it's a little raspy. I'm going on to 9 days left of shelter. And that time when it comes, April 1st, is a very bittersweet time for us. One, we did make it through winter. We saved a lot of people. We helped a lot of people. But now we're shutting the doors on that shelter program. And you're right, a lot of people are going to be forced to go back to living on the streets or maybe going back in their car. You know, we do a lot. The one thing that I like to educate is people know the winter program, but year-round, we provide direct support services, case management, access to social work. So if somebody comes in and wants to find a job, let's get them a job. If somebody wants to get housing vouchers, let's fill out the vouchers. You want to get plugged into substance abuse treatment, let's do that. Do we have to send you to a detox, or can we coordinate with Seafield to get you a bed? So we're spending our time year-round to not have you in my shelter come November 1st. And that's the important aspect of what we do that I really like to educate people is that support services that happens year-round. So even though my shelter ends, the night program ends,
Yeah.
we're still there the
Still
following
there.
day, and we're still carrying on the work that we do.
Well, we've got a few seconds left for this segment, then we're coming back for the second segment. I wish our police chiefs were here, Sorolla and Erickson, because they might also be an important voice here. Because as these people go out into the streets and from the shelters, they come in contact a lot with the police. So, but that's for another show. But we will, thank you so very, very much for this first segment. We'll be right back with the second segment, protecting the most vulnerable in our community.